Alright you guys, so I got my image traced on to the front of the screen, like I mentioned in the last section. And I want to paint filler on the back of the screen, so I'm going to flip it over. But I just wanted to talk about brushes. I'm not using anything fancy as far as paintbrushes go. Obviously a large paintbrush will let you cover a larger area more quickly, but allow for less detail. And that's true of kind of smaller brushes, just depending on the shape of the bristles and the shape of the brush. You're going to be able to cover areas more quickly or more slowly, but with greater detail. So just keep that in mind. You know, pick a brush that has a tip that kind of works with the sort of marks that you're trying to make. None of these brushes are fancy or expensive. I just generally get sets of cheap brushes, and they last a long time for this because I'm not actually like painting with anything real. The filler is water-based while it's wet, so as long as I rinse out my brush as soon as I'm done, it usually comes completely clean. A little bit of hand soap or dish soap will help as well if I need to. So I have a like a ketchup squeeze bottle. This is just the Speedball screen filler that they sell at Allard's. It's nothing fancy. I just divvied it up into a small bottle to have for myself, as opposed to opening the big container each time. Because I buy it by the quart instead of by the pint. So yeah, I'm gonna flip this over. Another reason to paint the filler onto your screen on the back is that you're less likely to glue the screen down to your workstation. So the filler is, when it dries, it's like glue essentially. It sort of glues stuff to the screen. So if I'm painting it on this side and it dries, it can glue the screen down to the board, or even just while I'm painting, it will drip through and touch and get your workstation all dirty. So again, if I flip it over, there we go. I can paint it on this side, and as long as I'm not putting too much in the screen all at once, I should be fine. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll get a little dollop of it out in the area of the screen where my tape is going to keep it from dripping down, and that way I have like a little well that I can kind of go back to paint it onto the mesh with. Other times I'll use like just the lid of a jar or something to contain it, and just use that, you know, like as a little palette for the filler. So I'm going to get myself set up with some filler out, and I will fill in the areas with the paintbrush in time-lapse mode. So you guys, again, we can go through it kind of quickly with me doing it that way. One thing to keep in mind is I don't need a ton of it in the screen for it to block, but I do want it to look kind of this iron oxide color. If I paint it on and it's still yellow or orange where I painted it, generally it's not quite thick enough. So you want to find that perfect medium. I don't need it to be raised or so thick that I can feel it as a bump, but I do need it to kind of look this color, or at least a nice deep red. All right. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and paint in my filler in these areas that I've drawn with the pencil. Alright, so I've got my screen filler painted on. It's dried. I think I let it dry for about 20 to 30 minutes. You'll notice that portions of it will dry almost right after you paint it in. Other areas where it's a little bit thicker will take more time. You can use a hair dryer to dry it. Make sure you don't point the hair dryer at one spot for too long, because the screen will eventually melt and split apart. But if you keep it moving, you know, maybe 6 to 8 inches, you know, away from it, it will dry it more quickly. You can also put it in front of like a fan or a box fan or something like that. You can put it outside in the sun if it's sunny when you're working on it. All those things will speed up how quickly the filler dries. One thing I forgot to mention earlier in the video is that you want to make sure that the filler is shaken up really good before you use it, because it will separate, and it will separate into a solution that is water soluble and a solution that isn't. And if you paint water soluble solution onto your screen, it'll be a little bit more transparent. But other than that, it doesn't look significantly different. But what will happen is the first time you print, it will dissolve in the ink and just kind of like disappear. So again, just make sure you shake up the screen filler really well before you paint it onto your screen, and you'll be golden. Okay, so I've got this painted on. I want to flip it over to print, like so. Clamp it in. I'm going to do some different values of green. That's what I've sort of decided on for this print. You guys have already watched me print in 2 different videos, so I am going to put it in time lapse while I print, and just kind of crank through it that way. All right, I've got my paper ready, got my ink ready, got my squeegee ready. I'm good to go. Alright you guys, so I printed my first layer. I left the ink on my Mylar, which again actually kind of is coming off on my fingers. It's still a little damp, but you know, the longer I leave it on there, the harder it is to clean off eventually. But I left it on there because there's kind of a trick I can do for this process if I have my own printing board. So I made sure that I cleaned my screen on the press and I left it clamped in. I didn't unclamp it. So there it is clamped in, and that means that it's still going to print in that same exact spot where I printed on the Mylar before. So this can be a little tricky. There are some advantages to it. I think the speed of getting it lined up, again, is quicker, because if you have your tape marks down, and I'm using these pens, which I would normally share with you guys, but I can't since we're not teaching in the classroom. But if I have my tape marks set up on the board, then I can leave them set up, because the paper is going to fall in the same place every time with those tape marks. The Mylar is going to lay over it in the same place, and the screen is going to hit it in the same exact spot, which is kind of cool. So I have 2 options. I could tape this printout to my screen, and just again, I'm lining it up with those little check marks that I made on the screen for the edge of the paper. Or another trick is if I have made my tracing paper version of the drawing, I can just tape this down to the Mylar. And you can always take your screen out and reset it all back up. There's no reason why you couldn't just print fresh on your Mylar each time, and yeah, just reline up your paper and reset your tape marks. So that's normally what we do during the regular semester, because we only have, you know, we have a limited number of print boards, and we have more students than we have print boards, and so no one can leave their screen or their image on the print board. It just doesn't work out. Unfortunately, we just don't have the facilities or the space for that. Okay, so I've got my tracing on top of that, and what I need to do is just I can set this back down, and it should line back up to that. And then I have my sketch or printout here. And I can just trace out where my next area of values are going to be, my next lightest set of values. And again, I'm not like stuck with how this printed out. It's just a suggestion. It's kind of like a starting point, right? So I'm not sticking to that exclusively. I'm kind of assigning different colors, like this value and this value are slightly different because they're different colors, but in the scheme of things, if I make those the same with the nose, the highlights on the nose, it's going to look about right. And then I can do some of that in the background as well, like the lightest colors in the background. I'll go ahead and make those blocked out for this next layer. Oops, I'm tracing the wrong section. See how easily that happens. Just not paying attention. All right. And that might be it. So the first couple runs, I'm not going to stop out much. And honestly, they're gonna look like little. I mean, I have the dragon that I traced out, so that's going to give me a little bit of sort of distinction as far as, you know, an image or something that's going on. But overall, the first couple layers are going to look a little abstract, and that's kind of a normal thing. And actually, you know, as I've done this more and more, it's the part that I think is the most fun, is how it kind of comes together in the last layer or two. Like the first couple layers, there's not really a ton going on. So you don't see much as far as an image. And for me, that was really helpful because I get so addicted to the thing looking like the thing that I kind of lose the, you know, the enjoyment of making it or the fun of the abstraction of it. Because, you know, no matter what, no matter how realistic an image looks, it's still an abstraction. You know, you're still converting an image onto a surface. And especially with this printmaking, the screen printing process, we're kind of converting, we're making an even bigger transformation to a certain extent. And I kind of would forget about that. I'd sort of get lost in trying to make it just look as photographic or realistic as possible, which is fine, but it's also just kind of limiting. There's so much more you can do with an image than that. And I would sort of just like lose that in the process. So it's nice to be forced to engage with that kind of abstraction. Just by the nature of the process. All right, so I think that's it. Maybe do some of these highlights down here. And remember, it's your first time, so just going through the steps of the reduction is the most important part as far as learning the process. Getting it to look absolutely photographic is not, in the long run, going to help you understand the process better. But going through the steps is going to help you understand the process better. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. It's maybe that lightest value. Okay, well, that's it. Like I said, the first couple layers are going to take a lot less time to, you know, the tracing is going to take a lot less time, and then the fillering, you're going to have a lot less area to fill, and that's pretty normal. Until you get to like the fourth or fifth colors, it's really not going to look like much of anything at first to start. And you guys will see that as I go through the steps with mine. So, like I've said, I've really taken great care to kind of leave the screen in here. And this is the downside to this way of working, is that now I have to paint with the paintbrush kind of standing up and at an angle, which is a little awkward, I think, at first. I might try to stand this on its side so you guys can see it in the camera a little bit better. But normally I just leave this up like this, and then I just, you know, rest my hand against it and just paint filler very carefully into those spots. And that's it. So again, once that filler is dry, this just goes down in the same place in my registration marks, or pins in my case. The paper should line up. It should line exactly up to the paper again. So I don't need this down anymore. And I will go ahead and switch you guys to a time lapse while I paint in the filler. And yeah, you guys can watch me do that.